Once upon a time, in the heart of America, in the stillness of a foggy morning, a nation gazed at the reflections of a shattered mirror. Brother turned against brother. The ground smelled of blood. And amidst this chaos, a man stood, weary yet erect. That man was Abraham Lincoln. Tall, slender, deep lines on his face, an eternal sadness in his eyes. A lone leader had a story that would echo throughout history. But this story was not born in palaces. It was not raised in empires. This story, it began in a small log cabin in the woods. The year is 1809. On the borders of Kentucky, in a place called Hardin County. Inside a small cabin, a child was born. There was no doctor, no wealth. Only a mother, a father, and a prayer to God. This child would later change the destiny of a nation. But no one knew it that day. He was simply the child of a poor farming family. His name, Abraham Lincoln. As time progressed, America was changing. Lands were growing, factories were rising, but people were being divided. On one side, freedom, on the other, slavery. On the other, hope, on the other, fear. And between these two worlds, a boy named Lincoln was building his own world in the dusty pages of books. His story isn't just the story of a president. It's the story of a person's struggle with their inner battles. It's a journey from darkness to light, from poverty to power, from despair to immortality. But every journey begins with a single step. And Abraham Lincoln's path would stretch from that small cabin to the heart of a nation. There was a man? He was remembered for his integrity. He illuminated the centuries with his words. And he reborn a nation. A small cabin. Mud walls, a cracked ceiling. The freezing cold of winter seeps in. Snow is falling outside, and a child is inside. He's turning the pages of an old book by a small stove. That child is Abraham. His shoes are torn, his hands are calloused. But there's something else in his eyes. Curiosity. Lincoln's father, Thomas Lincoln, was a hard-working but stern man. He was a farmer who lived off the land, the axe, and the sweat of his brow. He always told his son, "If a man cultivates the land, he'll eat. You won't eat books, Abe." But little Abraham had something else on his mind. He wanted to work with words, not the land. He carried a thinker's heart in a farmer's body. There were no schools, no teachers. But he never stopped learning. He borrowed books from neighbors and read them line by candlelight at night. Sometimes the Bible, sometimes law books, sometimes stories. But life wasn't easy. His mother, Nancy, fell ill when Lincoln was only 9 years old. A mysterious illness called milk sickness swept over the village. His mother lay in a fever for days. And one morning, silence fell over the cabin. Little Abraham couldn't hold back his tears as he carried his mother's coffin. That day, a child encountered death for the first time. But that same day, he made a promise. One day, people won't suffer so much. One day, there will be justice for everyone. Poverty crushed him, but it didn't break him. Every hardship shaped the stones of his character. Loneliness became his teacher. Books were his friends. Nature was his refuge. One day, a neighbor said, "That boy picks up a book at every opportunity. He sits on a tree trunk and ponders a word for hours." Lincoln's mother, Nancy, would always tell him in his final days, "Abe, be a good man. Goodness is God's greatest law." And that word remained like a seal on Lincoln's heart. Even years later, he carried that sentence in every decision, in every conversation. Time passed. His family moved to Indiana. A new life, new challenges. Forests, fieldwork, long winters. But Abraham began to change. He was physically strong, but there was always another struggle within him. One time, he argued with his father. "Dad, I'm not going to be a farmer." His father shouted angrily. "And what are you going to be, huh? A king?" Abraham quietly replied, "No, just a useful man." And that day, the direction of his destiny became a little clearer. While the other children in the village were playing, he pondered. How could a society be just? Why were people considered superior to one another? Even at that age, Lincoln had big questions on his mind. It would take years to find the answers. But he would never give up the search. This child, raised under an ash-colored sky, would one day illuminate the sky of freedom. Years passed. That poor boy in the woods had grown up. He and his family moved from Indiana to Illinois. New lands, new people, but one thing remained constant. Abraham's desire to learn. Everyone in the village knew him. He was a quiet, thoughtful, and eccentric young man. Many of his peers mocked him. They mocked him for his bulk and height. But Lincoln paid no attention. At night, he continued reading by candlelight, book in hand. The author he was most influenced by in those days was Thomas Paine. Paine's writings on freedom, equality, and reason left a deep impression on Lincoln's mind. Over time, he wasn't content with just reading. He also began to write. He wrote letters to the people in the village, sometimes with jokes, sometimes with ideas, inspiring them to think. His words were powerful. People began to realize that when this quiet young man spoke, he was worth listening to. Young Abraham worked various jobs to earn his living. He worked in the fields, worked as a hauler on the river, and even ran a shop for a while. But he found no lasting peace in any of his jobs. It was as if a voice within him told him, "Your place is not here." One day, he saw a crowd gathered in front of a courthouse. A lawyer was speaking passionately in court. He moved people with his words, telling them a story about justice. Lincoln was captivated. That day, he said to himself, "One day, I will speak like that. I will tell people what justice means." That decision completely changed the course of his life. He began studying law whenever he could find books. He taught himself law without attending any school. At first, no one took him seriously. But Abraham's perseverance astonished those around him. Over time, he earned the trust of the town. He became known as a just, honest, and humble man. When someone had a disagreement, they would say, "Ask Lincoln." Because his word meant trust to everyone. During that period, Lincoln also experienced the first major emotional upheaval of his life. The woman he loved, Anne Rutledge, suddenly fell ill and died shortly thereafter. This loss shook Lincoln deeply. He withdrew into himself for a long time. That smiling, humorous man suddenly fell silent. One of his friends wrote of those years. Sometimes Lincoln would look up at the sky, as if searching for someone. There was an indescribable sadness in his eyes. This pain only deepened the emotional depths within him. He now viewed life differently. His questions about himself, people, and even God multiplied. But he also knew, life wouldn't stop. He had to get back on his feet. After a while, he began working again. He furthered his legal career and argued in court. Everyone admired his eloquence. The care he took in choosing his words would both move and provoke thought. But Lincoln's true goal was now greater. He didn't just want to be a lawyer. He wanted to change things. He saw the injustice of slavery. Living in a society where people were humiliated because of their color touched his conscience. The fact that a black person couldn't be free was like a heavy wound in his heart. And one day he said to himself, "If I ever have the power, I will undo this injustice." That statement was the first step that would carry Abraham Lincoln into politics. He was still a young man. But the fire within him was already burning. He had found his own path. That path would transform him first into an orator, then into a prospective leader, and finally into the conscience of a nation. But he was only at the beginning. And this path would be filled with loss, rejection, and loneliness. But Lincoln knew how to walk in the dark. Because he carried the light within, not outside. As Abraham Lincoln made steady strides in his legal career, his interest in social issues grew. The injustice of slavery and the lack of equal rights deeply troubled him. One day, a group of people gathered in Illinois, and discussions began on state politics. Lincoln decided to give his first speech. He was excited, but his words were ready. He spoke in simple, clear language. He both conveyed his ideas and provoked their reflections. The audience was impressed, some took notes, while others simply listened silently. The first step had been taken. But there were no easy paths in politics. Lincoln faced several unsuccessful elections. He lost some, and he nearly won others. Yet, he did not give up. He viewed his failures as lessons and refined his strategy. Over time, Lincoln began to emerge in the public eye as an honest and trustworthy man. He deceived no one, made no exaggerations with his promises, and delivered on everything he promised. This simplicity and honesty gave him great power. People felt as if they were following a true leader, not a candidate. Lincoln's political thought, however, was shaped by his anti-slavery views. He dreamed of abolishing slavery completely, but voicing this idea openly was still dangerous. America was divided on the issue. There were freedom fighters in the North and pro-slavery fighters in the South. Lincoln had to strike a balance. He must earn the public's trust without compromising his own values. One of his first major breakthroughs was the state congressional elections. His speeches focused on justice, equal rights, and fair government. His opponents tried to belittle him, but Lincoln remained calm and patient. His words resonated with the people. A journalist at the time wrote, "Lincoln's speeches have the ability to convey complex ideas in a way that everyone can understand. Listening to him both cleared my mind and gave me hope." Successes began to come gradually. Lincoln was elected to the Illinois state legislature. He was no longer just a lawyer, he had become the voice of the people. People trusted him, and his ideas mattered. But Lincoln didn't see this as the end. He was preparing for a greater calling. During this period, Lincoln shaped his approach to politics. Simple and clear speech, honesty and transparency, speaking through actions to gain the people's trust. And these early political successes laid the foundation for his future leadership. Lincoln's path was now visibly rising. But the great struggle was yet to come. A nation was falling apart, and would Lincoln's leadership have the strength to unite those fragments? This question marked the beginning of the next era that would propel him onto the stage of history. Abraham Lincoln, having achieved political success in Illinois and earned the public's trust, was now ready for a grander stage. The country was experiencing one of the most critical periods in its history. Tensions between the North and South were growing daily. The economy, agriculture, industry, and most importantly, the issue of slavery were dividing America in two. Lincoln felt this tension deeply as he rose through the ranks of politics. Every decision, every speech could affect not only his own destiny but also the fate of the country. And he was ready to accept this immense responsibility. His journey to the presidency began with his emergence as a candidate within his party. Unlike other candidates, Lincoln kept his presence low, using simple and understandable language in his speeches. Honesty and sincerity were the strongest qualities that distinguished him from his rivals. The campaign process was demanding. He met with the people in every city and town, listened to them, and answered their questions sincerely. People found trust in his words. On one side were politicians living in luxury, and on the other, a poor but honest candidate. Lincoln was winning the hearts of the people. In the North, freedom fighters supported Lincoln. In the South, pro-slavery fighters opposed him. The country was on a balance beam, and every step carried danger. But Lincoln did not give up. He carefully chose his words to be understood by the people. The goal was not just to win votes, but to speak the truth. Throughout the campaign, Lincoln's speeches were of a historic nature. Simple sentences contained profound messages: equal rights, justice, freedom, and humanity. Listening to him filled people with both thought and hope. Many, upon hearing Lincoln for the first time, said, "This man is not just a candidate, he has a vision." And then Election Day arrived. For the first time in his life, Lincoln was facing a national test. On that day, not only votes but also the future of a nation were being weighed. When he won, Abraham Lincoln instantly became America's leader. But his victory also meant a great responsibility. The country was falling apart. Freedom on one side, slavery on the other. And Lincoln now had to bridge these two worlds. The presidency was more than just an office. For Lincoln, it was a duty that represented the public trust. Every decision, every word would shape the future of the country. And he shouldered this great responsibility without fear. Abraham Lincoln's path to the presidency was built on patience, honesty, and a passion for justice. This journey would make him not just a leader, but a symbol. But the real test was just beginning. A nation's civil war and Lincoln's leadership. When Abraham Lincoln ascended to the presidency, America was on the brink of a precipice. Tensions between the North and South were at their peak, and civil war seemed inevitable. The issue of slavery was more than just a political issue, it was a matter that shaped the soul, morality, and future of a nation. When the Civil War began, Lincoln was fully aware of his role as both leader and strategist. Every decision could affect thousands of lives. But he did not give in to fear. While facing the brutality of war, he managed to maintain his humanity. Lincoln's leadership was not measured solely by military victories. He always valued humanity. He mourned every loss, both in the military and in civilian life. He read soldiers' letters and sent comfort to their families. A leader's strength came not only from commanding, but also from empathy. During this period, Lincoln delivered a speech that would go down in history, the Gettysburg Address. It was a short speech of just a few minutes, but his words united a nation. This nation was founded on liberty. And it is our duty to preserve that liberty. Lincoln's leadership also demonstrated his strategic acumen. He held lengthy meetings with his generals, carefully analyzing every plan. Sometimes decisions were delayed, sometimes he was overwhelmed by criticism. But he always remembered one thing: doing what was right was more important than being popular. Throughout the war, Lincoln consistently kept the abolitionist idea on the agenda. In 1863, he declared the Emancipation Proclamation. This decision was not just a morale-boosting step, it was a step that changed the spirit of America and influenced the course of history. Lincoln also made sure to communicate directly with the people. His speeches were simple and sincere. His words resonated with the people. Many viewed him not only as a president but also as a father, a guide, and a symbol of hope. But the war's price was heavy. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives, cities were destroyed, families were torn apart. The burden on Lincoln's shoulders was more than any one person could bear. Yet he stood firm. While struggling with fear and sorrow within himself, he did not shake the public's trust. It was during this period that Lincoln demonstrated the meaning of leadership. Determination, yet humane sensitivity. Strategy, yet conscience. Strength, yet humility. Throughout the Civil War, Lincoln's struggle was not merely to preserve the unity of a country. He was defending the spirit of a nation. And after every loss, after every hardship, he reaffirmed it. In those difficult times, Abraham Lincoln became not just a president but also a symbol. His words and decisions paved the way for the rebirth of a nation. And one of the greatest tests in history was yet to be completed. By the end of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was exhausted. Years of struggle, thousands of losses, and anxieties had weighed down his shoulders. But now there was hope. The country was becoming whole once again. Slavery had been abolished. The Emancipation Proclamation and the subsequent passage of the 13th Amendment had secured the freedom of millions. Lincoln knew the gravity of this historic moment. He felt a profound sense of relief, not just as a president but as a human being. The people no longer saw him merely as a leader. His words, his patience, and his justice had struck a chord in the hearts of millions. "This man is the conscience of a nation," they said. The streets of the cities were filled, people longed to see him, to shake his hand, to thank him. But this victory came at a price. The weariness of the years still hung on Lincoln's face, the shadow of war still in his eyes. Sleeping at night was difficult, and waking up in the morning felt like a test. Every decision, every step, was watched by history. And that dark evening arrived, April 14, 1865. A play was being shown at Ford's Theater. The crowd was laughing, the actors were playing their roles on stage. But there was a shadow. John Wilkes Booth had approached Lincoln. A bullet had destroyed not just a man, but the leader of a nation. Lincoln was dead. But his ideas, his words, and his legacy lived on. He was no longer just a president, he was a symbol, an inspiration. He had become the voice of freedom, justice, and humanity. The people mourned. But they also believed in something else. Lincoln's vision would continue to guide even in his absence. And history has shown once again that no matter how strong a man's will to do what is right, time will remember him and immortalize him. Abraham Lincoln died as a man, but he lived forever as an idea. Abraham Lincoln may have passed away, but his ideas live on. His honesty, courage, and passion for justice have inspired people for centuries. Lincoln showed us that a person's strength lies not only in their physical strength but also in their conscience. Standing up for what is right, standing tall in the face of adversity, and upholding justice can change the destiny of a nation. His legacy is not limited to the abolition of slavery. Lincoln became a symbol of human rights, equality, and freedom. His words are still read around the world, and his speeches are still remembered. "A nation's sense of justice is shaped by the character of its leaders," he said. Even today, those who follow Lincoln's path emulate his values. To be courageous in the face of adversity, to give voice to the voiceless, and to stand up for what is right. This is the greatest lesson Abraham Lincoln left behind. A nation was reborn through him. But more importantly, humanity gained a light. That light, a symbol of courage and justice, continues to illuminate our path even in dark times. And as we remember every Lincoln word, every Lincoln action, we understand once again. One man's determination can change the future of a nation. There was one man, Abraham Lincoln. And he will live forever as a light for humanity.